Hi there, thanks for tuning in. I'm Michael and this is A Brush with Paint. In this video we're going to look at landscape painting and the various aspects of that. So without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so this is my basic composition into which I'm just using Photoshop to create this grid, and that's the photo reference right there, obviously. So what I liked about this was that these sort of diagonals that cross through it, and the river and the subsequent river that sort of draws your eye into roughly the middle, but actually just off centre of the middle, and everything is sort of split up with these verticals. I think a good composition is a mixture of verticals and some strong diagonals which sort of subdivide your picture area up into roughly equal sort of shapes and keep various zones of interest going. And these two rivers, they sort of converge down the bottom there, and there's just effectively quite a lot going on. So anyway, that's what I liked about it. And now I'm just reinforcing what I've roughed out in sienna with some basic lines to sort of determine where everything's going to go. As you've noticed, this is a sort of it is a time-lapse video. I spent many hours with this. I have to apologise for the back of my head twitching away like that. It only lasts about 30-40 seconds and then you won't have to look at that anymore. So I often start out kind of fidgety and a little bit unaware, or not knowing quite where things are going to go, and I'm working it out the whole time. And as is often the case, starting is sometimes the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things to do, together with finishing. This is going to be my most foreground tree, that one in the middle there. So establishing that early on is what I felt was quite important. What I've learnt through doing lots of oil paintings is that the early stage, if you like, is sort of important and not important at the same time, perversely. I've just grabbed a bigger brush here because I've got kind of bored of fidgeting with the little one. Sometimes it's important to just sort of fill out some big major sort of areas just to sort of give your mind a clue as to where the painting is headed. And then once you feel like you're sort of underway, well then you're sort of you have some momentum going, if you like. In the early stages of a painting, I'm not really too worried about getting colours exactly right, but I am quite keen to get the lightness and darkness of things correct. So obviously things that are far away, things into the distance, lose their contrast, generally speaking. I mean, of course there are exceptions to this. If you can imagine a photograph of a long highway in America, and in the distance there's a bright red billboard, that might be an exception to the rule, and that would actually be quite difficult to paint because your eye would get constantly drawn to that. Once I started to get a little bit sort of lost in these greens, I purposefully decided to switch to the river, which I knew was going to be dark, and I figured if I got quite a lot of information in about how that river is acting, that would trick my mind's eye into sort of fleshing out the rest of the scene. Once I started putting a few of these rocks in, I found myself almost, quite a lot of the time, just making them up. Once you understand how one boulder is sort of how it looks, then you can replicate that. And as long as you don't make too many actual repetitions, because repetitions in painting are not good, you have to kind of mix things up a little bit where you can, just to keep the interest of the viewer going. So it's really at this point I'm spending more time looking at the painting and less time looking at the photograph, because once you've got a lot of detail down, like here, these little, I'm just adding little blobs, and then I think, oh, that looks like a rock, or that looks like that's where the water might run, and your mind starts to see the image that you have in front, that you've made, more than the one that you're looking at. And also it helped me to determine the rest of how light and how bright things are going to be. At this point I'm feeling a little bit sort of lost as to quite where this is going, and this is something I often wrestle with the sort of more complex scenes, is that I get a little bit despondent, but half my brain tells me to just keep going. And this is very important. It's almost like a sort of a wall. You hear marathon runners talk about going through a wall. Well, this is the painting equivalent, I think, and you just have to learn how to press on. If you're getting frustrated with an area of a painting, then move to another bit. If you're getting really frustrated with the painting as a whole, then I would suggest just leaving it. Go away, do something else, leave it for a day, leave it for however long you like, and when you come back to it, you might look at it again, which I have done many times, and think, oh right, oh so that's what needs, and before you know it, you'll be carrying on again. So don't get too dismayed too quickly. I mean, you just got to keep on. Some people will be very sort of systematic about landscape painting and the approach, and that's fine. Everyone's got their own method. They might, do the sky completely first, and then the next thing nearest, and so on, and be quite methodical about it. But I like to sort of bounce from one thing to the next. That's how I sort of do it. Greens in landscapes can be notoriously difficult to master, but generally, as a rule, they will become more vibrant in the foreground, and as they dissipate into the distance, they get sort of greyed out. All colours in nature, when you look out into the distance, will become desaturated. In other words, they lose their vibrancy, and as they come forward, they increase in vibrancy. And as long as you stick to that sort of principle, you'll be in the ballpark. I ended up going really quite bright in the corner there with that sky, but that makes everything else read as something that's having light falling on it. People love detail in paintings, but what is often the case is that you don't need to put all the detail in. The viewer's eye will actually do a lot of that work for you. So if you look at some of the most famous landscape paintings, you'll see that there isn't always every blade of grass painted and what have you, but there will be hints here and there. And what happens is, when you're looking, or when the viewer's looking at a painting, their mind sort of fills in the blanks. I think that the job of an artist or someone who paints pictures, if you want to put it that way, is to learn how to make a pleasing painting. And there's a difference between a great painting and a great photograph. Both have their strengths. Photographs do things that are incredible, that perhaps are best represented in a photograph, but painting does things that photographs can't. And learning to sort of let go of this need to be absolutely perfect is helpful. I mean, now don't get me wrong, there are people who call themselves the super realist painters, hyper-realism, and that's fine if that's your thing. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that, but also there is a great joy to be had in looking at something which is sort of realistic but has impressionistic qualities about it. I mean, after all, you know, Claude Monet, if you get right close up to his paintings, there isn't any detail. But what the mind likes, I think, is when you step back and it all looks kind of real, and it tickles something in the brain, I think. So for me, the sweet spot is somewhere between out and out impressionism and realism. That's what I like about it anyway. And now I've got most of my information down at this point, I'm starting to feel much better about where this is headed, and this is a good feeling, because what it means is that your mind can tell, it can sort of see the finish line, if you like. And here, for example, these branches and things I'm putting in, I'm just sort of making them up, really. I found it quite difficult to sort of formulate, but the more I sort of pushed it and pulled it this way and that, the more it started to make sense. It's better to go vivid early on, because you can always dull things down, but if you put muddy colours down, it's quite difficult to make them then vibrant afterwards. This was the fun part for me, putting in all these little shapes on the water where the light hits. I found that I only had to do this a few times and it started to really read like running water. And having put my boulders in helps me to think about the way that the water sort of wraps around them, which in turn gives it direction, and the whole thing just sort of worked itself out in a way. It was quite fun to do. Once you've got a lot of detail down, like here, these little, I'm just adding little blobs, and then I think, oh, that looks like a rock, or that looks like that's where the water might run, and your mind starts to see the image that you have in front, that you've made, more than the one that you're looking at. Well, thanks once again for watching. If you like this video, please click the like and maybe even hit the subscribe button, and until next time, bye for now.